Chapter 10 of a Strange Disappearance. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Strange Disappearance by Anna Catherine Green. Chapter 10 The Secret of Mr. Blake's Studio.
Mr. Blake is at dinner, sir, with company, but I will call him if you say so.
No, returned Mr. Gryce. Show us into some room where we can be comfortable, and we will wait till he has finished. The servant bowed, and stepping forward down the hall, opened the door of a small and cozy room heavily hung with crimson curtains.
I will let him know that you are here,
said he, and vanished towards the dining room. I doubt if Mr. Blake will enjoy the latter half of his bill of fare as much as the first, said I, drawing up one of the luxurious armchairs to the side of my principal. I wonder if he will break away from his guests and come in here. No, if I am not mistaken, we shall find Mr. Blake a man of nerve. Not a muscle of his face will show that he is disturbed. Well, said I dread it. Mr. Gryce looked about on the gorgeous walls, and the rich, old-fashioned furniture that surrounded him, and smiled one of his grimmest smiles. Well, you may, said he. The next instant, a servant stood in the doorway, bearing, to our great astonishment, a tray well set with decanter and glasses.
Mr. Blake's compliments, gentlemen, said he,
setting it down on the table before us.
He hopes that you will make yourselves at home, and he will see you as soon as possible.
The humph of Mr. Gryce, when the servant had gone, would have done your soul good. Also, the look he cast at the pretty Dresden shepherdess on the mantelpiece, as I reached out my hand toward the decanter. Somehow, it made me draw back. I think we had better leave his wine alone, said he. And for half an hour we sat there, the wine untouched between us, listening alternately to the sound of speech-making and laughter that came from the dining room, and the solemn ticking of the clock as it counted out the seconds on the mantelpiece. Then the guests came in from the table, filing before us past the open door on their way to the parlors. They were all gentlemen, of course. Mr. Blake never invited ladies to his house, and gentlemen of well-known repute. The dinner had been given in honor of a certain celebrated statesman, and the character of his guests was in keeping with that of one thus complimented. As they went by us, gaily indulging in the jokes and light banter with which such men season a social dinner, I saw Mr. Gryce's face grow sober by many a shade, and when in the midst of it all, we heard the voice of Mr. Blake rise in that courteous and measured tone for which it is distinguished, I saw him reach forward and grasp his cane with an uneasiness I had never seen displayed by him before. But when, some time later, the guests having departed, the dignified host advanced with some apology to where we were, I never beheld a firmer look on Mr. Gryce's face than that with which he rose and confronted him. Mr. Blake's own had not more character in it.
You have called at a rather inauspicious time, Mr. Gryce, said the latter, glancing at the card which he held in his hand. What may your business be? Something to do with politics, I suppose.
I surveyed the man in amazement. Was this great politician stooping to act a part, or had he forgotten our physiognomies as completely as appeared?
Our business is not politics, replied Mr. Gryce, but fully as important. May I request the doors be closed?
I thought Mr. Blake looked surprised, but he immediately stepped to the door and shut it. Then, coming back, he looked at Mr. Gryce more closely, and a change took place in his manner. I think I have seen you before, said he. Mr. Gryce bowed with just the suspicion of a smile.
I have had the honor of consulting you before in this very house, observed he.
A look of full recognition passed over the dignified countenance of the man before us. I remember, said he, shrugging his shoulders in the old way. You are interested in some servant girl or other who ran away from this house a week or so ago. Have you found her? This with no apparent concern.
We think we have,
rejoined Mr. Gryce with some solemnity. "The river gives up its prey now and then, Mr. Blake." Still only that look of natural surprise. "Indeed! You do not mean to say she has drowned herself? I am sorry for that, a girl who had once lived in my house. What trouble could she have had to drive her to such an act?" Mr. Gryce advanced a step nearer the gentleman. "That is what we have come here to learn," said he, with a deliberation that yet was not lacking in respect due to a man so universally esteemed as Mr. Blake. "You, who have seen her so lately, ought to be able to throw some light upon the subject at least. Mr. he glanced at the card. "Mr. Gryce, excuse me. I believe I told you when you were here before that I had no remembrance of this girl at all. That if such a person was in my house I did not know it, and that all questions put to me on that subject would be so much labor thrown away." Mr. Gryce bowed. "I remember," said he. "I was not alluding to any connection you may have had with the girl in this house, but to the interview you were seen to have with her on the corner of Broome Street some days ago. You had such an interview, did you not?" A flush, deep as it was sudden, swept over Mr. Blake's usually unmoved cheek. "You are transgressing, sir," said he, and stopped. Though a man of intense personal pride, he had but little of that quality called temper, or perhaps if he had, thought it unwise to display it on this occasion. "I saw and spoke to a girl on the corner of that street some days ago," he went on more mildly, "but that she was the one who lived here I neither knew at that time nor feel willing to believe now without positive proof." Then, in a deep ringing tone of the stateliness of which it would be impossible to describe, he inquired, "Have the city authorities presumed to put a spy on my movements, that the fact of my speaking to a poor forsaken creature on the corner of the street should be not only noted but remembered?" "Mr. Blake," observed Mr. Gryce, and I declare I was proud of my superior at that moment, "no man who is a true citizen and a Christian should object to have his steps followed, when by his own thoughtlessness perhaps he has incurred a suspicion which demands it." "And do you mean to say that I have been followed?" inquired he, clenching his hand and looking steadily, but with a blanching cheek, first at Mr. Gryce, then at me. "It was indispensable," quoth that functionary gently. The outraged gentleman riveted his gaze upon me. "In town and out of town?" demanded he. I let Mr. Gryce reply. "It is known that you have lately sought to visit the Schoenmakers," said he. Mr. Blake drew a deep breath, cast his eyes about the handsome apartment in which we were, let them rest for a moment upon a portrait that graced one side of the wall, and which was, I have since learned, a picture of his father, and slowly drew forward a chair. "Let me hear what your suspicions are," said he. I noticed Mr. Gryce colored at this. He had evidently been met in a different way from what he expected. "Excuse me," said he, "I do not say I have any suspicions. My errand is simply to notify you of the death of the girl you were seen to speak with, and to ask whether or not you can give us any information that can aid us in the matter before the coroner." "You know I have not. If I have been as closely followed as you say, you must know why I spoke to that girl and others, why I went to the house of the Schoenmakers, and—" "Do you know?" he suddenly inquired. Mr. Gryce was not the man to answer such a question as that. He eyed the rich signet ring that adorned the hand of the gentleman before him, and suavely smiled. "I am ready to listen to any explanations," said he. Mr. Blake's haughty countenance became almost stern. "You consider you have a right to demand them. Let me hear why." "Well," said Mr. Gryce with a change of tone, "you shall. Unprofessional as it is, I will tell you why I, a member of the police force, dare enter the house of such a man as you are, and put him the questions I have concerning his domestic affairs. Mr. Blake, imagine yourself in a detective's office. A woman comes in, the housekeeper of a respected citizen, and informs us that a girl employed by her as a seamstress has disappeared in a very unaccountable way from her master's house the night before. In fact, been abducted, as she thinks from certain evidences, through the window,